introduction presentation. I would first also like the other speakers. I would like to extend my gratitude to the director. Louder. Okay.
More to the microphone. More into the microphone.
How about now?
That's better.
To the director of the South Caucasus office in Odessa for inviting me in this milestone event for the foundation. I'm also very pleased to be part of this distinguished panel. In my talk, I would like to make 4 points. One, it's on the perceptions of the Western engagement. There are these contemporary perceptions of the West in the region have been long-standing, offering a three-dimensional view of the West and Europe. So this West and Europe are interchangeable. Secondly, the three countries articulate common metaphors, but relate differently to the West. So I'm going to use the West now as a sort of overarching concept. Thirdly, there is a great paradox in which the unprecedented Western engagement over the last 20 years or so has not been matched by a more secure, more democratic, and more prosperous region. More prosperous, this can be contested because we're talking about three countries. And fourthly, it seems that the West, and more precisely the EU, seems to have benefited more from, in terms of its own security and energy interest in the region, while it remains crucial, and this is my last point, that it remains crucial that the West remains substantially engaged in the region, for it represents the only geopolitical and normative element for the region. So just briefly on the, to dwell a little bit on the perceptions of the West. So historically, this notion has been associated with political, economic, and social cultural progress emerging in the western parts of the Western Europe. The West was interchangeable with the concept of Europe as emerging, for instance, in the 19th century political intellectual debates in Georgia. The emergence of the Soviet Union, the aftermath of the Second World War, the dominant role of the United States in the Cold War politics of the continent expanded the notion of the West to include the US with its military capitalist expansion as it was understood in the Soviet space. But this expanded West was perceived in overtly negative terms. Post-Cold War perceptions of the West were radically transformed with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The West regained its positive dominant role in shaping the perceptions across the post-Soviet and communist space, including the new emerging states of the South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. However, what has transcended this historical time is this triadic or tri-dimensional view of the West. The first dimension is that of being a geopolitical entity capable of transforming the world around itself. So West is invested with this power. This geopolitical entity, however, needs to be clearly distinguished, for the political actors, as I will mention, are different. If we go to the 19th century, European political power politics, Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, and Russia were rather equal members in competing and ordering the continent, legitimizing their power under the notion of civilization. Now, the West is associated with the US, influential members of the European Union, such as Britain, United Germany, and France, and more recently, very recently, with the EU itself as an entity. Of course, what gives the West this strong geopolitical underpinning for the region is the role that NATO plays. Whereas the EU's geopolitical or geostrategic weight still remains to emerge. Thus, with the emergence of these states following the collapse of the Soviet Union, it became clear for each of these countries to search for establishing relations with richer, more powerful and better allies. Thus, the US, the EU countries, as opposed to Russia. I mean, this paradigm is already very much established. The West is comprised of, as I said, of multiple actors, of different capabilities, sharing though a normative element, that of a liberal, substantive democracy opposed to authoritarianism and even populist authoritarianism. These normative elements constitute the second dimension of the West, as that of a place or a source of modernity, of progress, and of socio-political alternatives in the economic and of economic prosperity. The modernization that was very much highlighted in yesterday's discussion. This is the realm of ideological struggle in the 20th century between liberal democracy, fascism, nationalism, democratic socialism that was part of the Soviet discourse, and which Francis Fukuyama triumphantly and rather prematurely claimed to be at the end of the century to have been won by the liberal, the democratic model. A third dimension is that of being seen as the place of the most advanced, the West, and this is also reflected in the discourses of the three countries, of a common past, a most advanced culture and of a common past, contentiously juxtaposing the Christian heritage and values with that of Enlightenment, democratic values and human rights, and more recently, and certainly the European identity. One common feature shared by the... How many minutes? 5 more. One common feature shared by the three countries with regards to how they see the relation with the West is expressed through the use of the metaphor of bridge. This is of mediating and understanding the civilizational clusters of East and West, of Asia and Europe. I'll bring some examples to illustrate this. In the post-Soviet Georgia, this metaphor of bridge between East and West was part of the intellectual discourse alongside that one which clearly identified Georgian national identity as Western, as European, by which it meant a common, or it means, a common bond on the basis of Christian heritage and values. The more Georgian political elites engaged with the West, seeking to integrate with the wider Euro-Atlantic political and military structures, the stronger became this articulation of the country as being a European. Whoever is familiar with the Georgian political discourse, one will remember the 1990 statement by Zurab Zhwania, politician Zurab Zhwania, who said that once Georgia became a member of the Council of Europe, that I am Georgian, therefore I am European. This became iconic and took a much more intensified role during the period of Rose Revolution, where also people are familiar with Saakashvili's statements of Georgian identity having deep roots, deep European roots, Georgia as an ancient European nation, and of being part of this, Georgia being forever yoked to this European identity. In similar terms, but in less intensity, emerges also the Armenian discourse, articulated also when Armenia became part of the Council of Europe, where the then President Kocharyan declared that being at the junction of civilization, so again the junction, the notion of the bridge connection, Armenia is the guardian of the European values. These European values by which the current president mentioned in the party convention, People's Party's convention in 2012, that these basically are our shared Christian heritage and commitments to basic liberties and the principles of democracy and human rights. The Azeri political discourse, meanwhile, has been articulated also as this connection of, or the role of a bridge between East and West, and it mirrors more or less the discourse that Turkey has vis-à-vis the European Union, meaning the Christian club, for which nonetheless the public discourses as they are as they seem to emerge in Azerbaijan, are articulated as that Azerbaijan wants to be part of this wider European space. For instance, Aliyev's joint statement with Barroso in 2011 was one in which he mentioned that the European vector of our policy is one of our priorities. So it's not the priority, it's one of the priorities. So you can see the muted tone vis-à-vis Georgia and Armenia. But we are committed to continue the process of democratization. We spoke about that a lot yesterday, what that meant. So basically, there is a gap between these perceptions of the West and these three dimensions that I mentioned, and what has happened over the last 20 years. And as we know, and I won't go through this, but the engagement between the institutional engagement that has occurred in the wider concept of the West, mainly NATO and European Union, has been not only a regional approach. For instance, in 2004, the region became a strategic area or a European strategic interest for NATO, and therefore the long-standing partnerships that were initiated in 1994, Partnership for Peace, and we know what happened also, the intensified membership action plan for Georgia led to, also was one of the reasons for the war. So there was an individual approach to NATO, but also a regional approach to the question of the security. The other engagement of the European Union, we are familiar also with the EU did not have a geostrategic policy with regards to the region until the European neighborhood policy, which cut as a double sword in a way, for a while it brought more to the attention this region to the wider European Union politics. It still did not give the most cherished element, which is the membership, and therefore the influence of the EU in this regard remains still weak, because the EU has the ability to transform, which is the basis of its being, of transforming its relations with other countries by including them and putting them in a much more rigorous monitoring. I will leave it here.
Okay. Thank you.